It's absolutely great to be here, and this week is looking increasingly unlikely I was going to be here because my wife actually is due to give birth on Monday and still hasn't. So I do have my phone here, and if it does ring, I may have to pick it up, and I may have to wrap this up quite quickly. So hopefully it won't. So as Fiona said, I'm CEO and co-founder of FanDuel. I'll go into a bit in a second about what FanDuel is, what we've done, and also what I've done is I've given about 20 minutes here and I sort of thought back, well, what would the 5 things that somebody I'd like to have told me when I set out, and I've sort of tried to capture 5 things that I think are the most important things that would be most useful to me. So the first question then is who are FanDuel? So we are a daily fantasy sports game. So if you're familiar with fantasy sports, the idea is you draft a team of real-world players and they're scored based on their performance. The strange thing about us is that we were founded in Edinburgh, but we exclusively focus on the US market. So there's around 30 million people play fantasy sports in North America, with NFL, baseball, basketball, and hockey being our major sports. We launched in 2009, and there's 5 co-founders. As Fiona mentioned, 2 of my co-founders are Edinburgh University graduates, and 2 are, like myself, are graduates from St Andrews. So they're 2 of my co-founders are now in their just turned 30 last year. So when we started, they were in their early to mid 20s. So they were actually 2 of them were just straight out of university. Like I say, could be where we are in 5 to 6 years' time. We've raised $18 million over the last 3 years. You start small, you raise your first, I remember we raised our first £25,000, a massive sort of milestone for us. But then as the business has scaled, we started to raise more and more. And we have 48 staff. That's split with about 25 of those, about 30 of those in Edinburgh, and the remainder in New York. We opened a New York office about a year and a half ago. Obviously, because our product is marketed exclusively in the US, we need to have marketing, product, customer service in the US market. But I'm still located in Edinburgh, and I still live in Edinburgh, and my kids go to school here. We're doing about $12 million in revenues annualized based on the current month, and growing very strongly. We're growing about 4x year on year, which is very strong growth. It brings lots of sort of challenges in themselves. Just to give you an idea, we have 48 staff today. We had around 20 about a year ago. So we've had to hire nearly 30 people in the last year, which is very, very challenging to do. We dominate, so we're kind of this emerging category of daily fantasy sports. The 30 million I mentioned to you is this sort of season long. We're this new sort of emerging category within it. We have something like 30 competitors now, but we were one of the first, and we're one of the most sort of aggressively at growing that market. And we dominate the market. We have about 60% plus market share. And then lastly, we won a whole bunch of awards. And awards are great. It always feels great. We won an award. But they don't really mean anything. It's certainly my view is they don't really mean anything. What they mean is, a recognition that we're doing well. But what matters to us is, how well are we performing financially? How well are we performing as a product for our consumers? Do users love the product? Do they keep coming back? So, sort of going on to the 5 things. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was just the importance of co-founders. Now, we've got 5 co-founders. That's slightly on the high side in terms of co-founders, but when you look at really successful companies, they are invariably founded by 2 or more people. And I'll go into a second on why that is, but I actually want to just kind of look at some great companies. So very first one. Okay, so interactivity. Can you name the person on the right in this photo? You want to shout it out? Who is it? Yes, thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, getting slightly harder. Who's to his right? Next one over. Sean Parker, correct. Might be a bit confused. He doesn't look like Justin Timberlake, but that's who Justin Timberlake was playing in the movie. And then to his right? Correct, Dustin Moskovitz. And then to his right? No, he should be in that photo. Yeah, he actually is Andrew McCallum, who I'd never heard of as a founder, but he's one of the founders. There's another couple of people who should be in the photo. Eduardo Slavin is one. Another one that potentially should be in the photo? No. So another co-founder was Chris Hughes, who's another undergraduate with Mark Zuckerberg. And then potentially, depending on your history, the Winklevoss brothers also should be in this photo, as they obviously came up with the idea. So pretty big co-founding group. I'd certainly, Mark bringing in like an amazing vision and technology and product focus, and certainly in my eyes, Sean Parker bringing in an amazing sort of business and funding experience and aggressiveness on growth. The next two, guy on the right, Bill Gates, yeah. On the left, Steve Allen. So Paul Allen. So founders of Microsoft. Okay, on the right, Steve Wozniak, yeah. And on the left, Steve Jobs. So Steve Wozniak, technical genius. Steve Jobs, vision, design, focus, passion, really much more on sort of somewhat more on the business side. And then a really hard one. Does anybody know these two? Can you name the company? What's that? No, it's a tech company. It's probably one of the UK's most successful consumer tech startups. Nobody knows it. So the company, and there's a bit of a clue at the background, and they'll be very busy this week. And the reason they're busy this week because it's Cheltenham, is the company's Betfair. Guy on the right is Ed Ray. Guy on the left is Andrew Black. So Andrew Black came up with the concept, the idea of a betting exchange. He sort of built it in Microsoft Access. Teamed up with Ed Ray, who had business and fundraising experience, and they grew it from there. And the interesting thing, if you look at this, is that generally in these situations, there's one guy who focuses on the business side, and there's one guy who focuses on the technology side. And you see that a lot in startups, that you have somebody who's really technically deep, and then you have somebody else who focuses much more on the business side. An interesting one, when I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs who are on the business side, they say, one of the things that sometimes say to me is, how do I hire my first engineer? And I always say to them is, you don't. You can't hire your first engineer. And the reason for that is that, how do you know a good one? How do you know that the project's late because he's rubbish, or it's late because it's really difficult? And what you need to do is you need to co-found a company. You need a co-founder, somebody who can then hire engineers underneath them. I've been very fortunate. We had 5 co-founders. We founded the company in 2007, so we're coming up to 6 years. And we're still all together, and they're still the senior management of the company. Co-founders are the most important thing in starting a business. And Paul Graham, who's a great entrepreneur and visionary, has said, you can change anything about your startup, absolutely anything. You can change the product, you can change the market, you can change the vision, but you cannot change your co-founders. It's a bit like location in terms of property. It is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing. So you've got your co-founder, you're going out on the road. The next thing you're looking at is, well, what else do I need? Well, you need advice, you generally need investment. And I'll be honest, Edinburgh has a lot of challenges in those areas. There's not that expertise. There's not a huge amount of venture capital or angel capital. So you kind of a lot of times have to look more broadly, and that's what we had to do. And what's the solution to that? Well, the solution is largely networking. And so what does networking look like? Well, I just wanted to give you one example. What I found in networking is, you tend to only be 1 or 2 intros away from pretty much anybody that you want to speak to, that you need to speak to. Now, it's important the way in which you do it, and I just want to give you an example of how I did it. Now, you're probably not be able to read this, but this is an email exchange that got me to an introduction. So email is from is a guy called Mike Clouser. He actually used to live in Edinburgh. I actually met him at a tech event here, and he worked at the Edinburgh University Informatics Ventures Group. And he sent me an email. I'd known him for a couple of years. He knew we were out fundraising. He said, "Hey, do you want an introduction to Sequoia?" And it's like, do I want an introduction to the top VC fund in the world, people who've invested in Apple and Google, in Yahoo and YouTube, and pretty much represent 20% of the NASDAQ, the most prolific and successful investors in the world? Yes. So he's like, yes, and then so he makes the introduction, which is sort of long. Here's these guys who are doing a really cool thing, and he sort of said, I'm from Northern Ireland, and the other guys are from Wales, and it was kind of a strange introduction. So one of the senior partners of Sequoia is Welsh, so I think he tried to play that angle. So I'm like, okay, sure, there's an email. Next thing, partner Sequoia says, yeah, let me introduce you to one of my team. And then he's like, yeah, let's meet up. Are you in Silicon Valley at the moment? And I was, because I was out fundraising. And we had a meeting the next day. So the amazing thing is that, this, for me, certainly when I started out, the idea that we had, within a year be pitching Sequoia was just unheard of. I didn't know anybody who knew them. But what you find is that you basically spend time building outwards from where you are today, and people that you know and people who might know people, and you invest in sort of longer term relationships. So Mike knew me. I'd worked with him, and we'd talked on and off for over a year. So he knew if he introduced me to Sequoia, which was a relationship he had, I wouldn't embarrass him. And I think that's one of the things that's really important. When networking, is always very important to just focus on a long-term relationship, not on what can somebody do for you that day or who can they introduce you to right now. It's important to sort of invest in building out the relationship, and that was something that was useful. Now, Sequoia didn't invest in us. We closed the investment of another fund, but it was just one of the examples of where you can go using a network. We've gone to the first part. You've got great co-founders, you're using your network, you're getting investment, you're getting good advisors. What's number 3? Number 3 is around focus. I'm going to just let you read this, so if you want to read through it. Starting and scaling a company is extremely difficult. I think actually it was Paul Graham, he put it on a scale and he said, well, what do you mean by difficult? And he said, well, if you're comparing it with being at school or university or in a job, in those circumstances, if you're reasonably smart and you work hard, you'll do well, right? Startups are not like that. Startups fail a lot. Smart people working hard fail at startups repeatedly. It's one of the things that kind of was a sort of surprise to me. I felt I was reasonably smart. I knew I was working really hard. But you hit failure again and again. The market doesn't care that you're working really hard and that you've got a good idea. And it's something that if you don't really focus, you're not going to be successful. And you need to focus relentlessly. Interestingly, Paul's focus here on some of the things that sort of within your startup, you're like, well, I'm doing this thing, but this other guy I could help out and I can make a bit of money on. That can be a real killer to startups. There's a wider killer, and if you go to a lot of sort of tech events you start to meet, is there's an allure to being an entrepreneur because there's sort of a glamour attached to it. And you'd certainly see some people who started as entrepreneurs and they morph into something which I would describe as the wantrepreneur. Now, a wantrepreneur is somebody who's like an entrepreneur, but actually their motivation is more about themselves. It's about how they are seen and perceived as this sort of successful entrepreneur, and that they've got this, and they like the lifestyle of being an entrepreneur. And how do you know them? Well, you see them at every tech conference. They're very active on Twitter and Facebook. They have a startup or multiple startups. And some of you may know people a bit like this. If you go to their LinkedIn profile, they're very long and they're full of all this detail of all this great stuff they've done. None of it's really that referenceable. Maybe that suits some people. I would just counsel anyone that if they ever feel that, it's like, don't do it. Build something meaningful. Startups, when they're successful, are so rewarding. Even when you're through the trenches,
Focus on building something meaningful and focus on that objective, and be very wary of anything that pulls you away from that objective. Networking is a very dangerous one as well. So networking is extremely important in a startup. You need to build up that level of support, but you also need to remember, when is that networking just an end in itself? It's like, I'm building up this network. If you're not building it up, it's not supporting your company, it's really more about you than what you're trying to achieve. So we step through 1 and 2, so we've got our co-founders, we've got our investment, we're focusing. What happens next? You know, surely things are motoring. Well, actually, what happens next is what I describe as it's failure, and lots of it. This here is our forecasts. We put this together in September 2008. When we did our first round of major investment. We did about $1 million of investment. The company then was a company called HubDub, and we had forecast that we were going to do by year 3, what was it, $27 million in revenue, and we knew it down to the last dollar, and that's why we had forecasted it so accurately. Didn't quite work out like that. Let me see. So go back to the start. You know, we were a very successful startup, but what actually happened against our forecast was this. Right, doesn't look nearly as exciting. If we had gone in and pitched that investor and said that this is what we're going to do, they would not have invested. And what does it feel like to go through 2009, 2010, 2011, and then be that far off your forecast? It's incredibly painful. What happened here was when in 2009 we'd just closed $1 million investment. Within 3 months, we became quickly obvious the product we had wasn't working. It wasn't going to get to scale. So we had to go back to our investor and say, it's not working, but we've got this new idea. You can imagine that didn't go down hugely well, considering they'd just spent 5 or 6 months kind of investigating the idea that we originally had, but they were like, fine, you know, we invested in the team. We didn't really say that. They said that afterwards it started to work, but you know, they were like, we can't really take the money out, so let's see where it goes. But it's very, very painful, and I would say less than 1 in 1,000 startups hit where they think they're headed. Even all the ones that you see today, like Instagram, which is blown up and has been sold for $1 billion, they pivoted. They had to change from the original business idea. And that is really difficult. You're missing your targets. Your investors are pissed off. Your board meetings are really difficult. There's a lot of pain in there. So it's one of the things just, and startups tend not to talk about it, is like you love this kind of positive PR glow of how everything's going really well, and that's the image you do want to give, but it's not true. It's not true in 999 cases out of 1,000. There's 1% one in 1,000 that maybe it is true, but all of the ones that you see, all those success stories, largely a lot of that is a PR artifact. So the last one then I wanted to focus on was just, we've gone through this. What do you think the #1 killer of startups is? What is the #1 reason for the reason why startups fail? Quite a few answers. Anyone who throw a few ideas out?
Financial mismanagement.
Financial mismanagement. Anyone else? It's also a good one. Yep. Yep. Market. Okay. So those are all reasons. Interesting, going back to Paul Graham, who's founded the Y Combinator and has invested in hundreds of startups. When he looked across the piece, he said the #1 reason for startups failing is giving up. And it seems amazing. There's all these different things that break apart. Now, obviously, if you follow your co-founders, there's a tendency to give up, but it's giving up. And he said the startups that work were the ones where the people just kept going. You know, the shit hit them, and they kept going, and they kept going. And he said, you know, at the end of it, the ones who were successful are the ones that just kept going. So just to give you an idea of where we've had to keep going, again, I had an email here. So this is an email, you probably can't read it. I'll just kind of summarize it. So this is a partner from a venture capital firm called Venrock. We were doing our series, this was our Series C investment. And it basically was a very polite, you know, we really like your business, we think you're doing great, but we're not going to invest in you. So it's a turn down email. And you could kind of think of it as if you've ever applied for a job, it's like a turn down to a job. The only difference is that failure to get investment will result in you having to close down your startup. you're losing your life savings, you having to lay off your entire staff, and a generally sort of bad experience. So it's really, really tangible failure to get this. This is one email. You would never just pitch one investor, you'll pitch lots. So how many of these emails have I got in the last 5 years? I've got over 100 of these. And each one of these is the culmination of a process of, using the network to get an introduction, to get in front of a partner, or maybe an associate, to pitch him, to say, hey, this is really interesting, why don't you pitch a partner? You pitch the partner, then he's like, I really like this, why don't you send me all this information? You pull together all this information, you send them, maybe you meet another partner. Continue, 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 and then you get, actually, this is really not what we want to do. So, by most metrics, our startup has been really successful, but it's been a long road. So that's sort of one of the things I just wanted to sort of bring clear. It's perseverance, it's not giving up. And I would say, after co-founders and not giving up, pretty much everything else is way down the list of importance. The product, the idea, the market. There's lots of things that are important there as well. But getting your co-founder right and never giving up are the two most important things, I would say. And that's it.